Terminal 4 echoed with the mundane shuffle of thousands, but for 8-year-old Leo, it was a terrifying symphony of chaos. Clutching his favorite noise-canceling headphones, he just wanted to reach his seat. Instead, a seasoned commercial pilot stood blocking the first-class cabin door, glaring at the young autistic boy with unfiltered disdain. "He's a security risk. Get him off my aircraft," the captain barked. He didn't realize the quiet mother standing behind the boy could end his career with a single phone call. John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a cathedral of transient anxiety, a sprawling monument to delayed schedules, overpriced espresso, and the frantic energy of international travel. For Vivienne Weaver, it was merely an obstacle course. Dressed impeccably but quietly in a cashmere Loro Piana sweater and tailored trousers, she blended perfectly into the sea of affluent transatlantic travelers. There were no flashy logos, no entourage of assistants, and absolutely nothing to indicate that she was the founder and majority shareholder of Weaver Global Logistics, a supply chain and aviation leasing empire worth north of $14 billion. Beside her, tethered to her hand by a gentle but firm grip, was her 8-year-old son, Leo. Leo experienced the world at a volume 10 times louder than anyone else. The harsh glare of the fluorescent lighting was not just bright. It was a physical weight pressing against his retinas. The overlapping announcements over the PA system, a flight to Frankfurt boarding at gate 22, a final call for a passenger to Rome, were a tangled web of audio that his brain struggled to untangle. To cope, Leo wore a pair of heavy-duty Bose noise-canceling headphones, customized with stickers of vintage commercial airliners. He was clutching a die-cast model of a Boeing 777-300ER, rubbing his thumb repeatedly over the miniature Rolls-Royce Trent engines in a rhythmic, self-soothing motion. Vivienne watched him with the hyper-vigilant gaze known only to mothers of neurodivergent children. Being a black woman raising an autistic black boy in America meant Vivienne lived in a constant state of defensive anticipation. She knew that society rarely afforded boys like Leo the grace of understanding. Where a white child having a sensory meltdown might elicit sympathetic smiles and murmurs about a tired little guy, Leo's moments of overwhelm were too often met with suspicious glares, tight lips, and coded whispers about discipline and control. "We are almost there, sweetie," Vivienne murmured, her voice a calm anchor in his turbulent sea. She knelt down, bringing her face level with his, ignoring the irritated sigh of a businessman behind them who had to steer his Rimowa suitcase around them. "Gate 28. Then we get to sit in our pod and you can watch the map on the screen. Remember the flight path we studied?" Leo didn't make eye contact, his gaze fixed somewhere just past her left shoulder, but he nodded sharply. "Great Circle route. JFK to London Heathrow. 3,451 miles. Cruising altitude 35,000 feet. His voice was a flat, melodic monotone. "Exactly right," Vivienne smiled, pressing a kiss to his forehead. They approached the first-class priority lane. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda with a slightly crooked name tag, scanned their boarding passes. Vivienne had booked the tickets under her married name, avoiding the corporate travel agency that usually handled her itineraries. She wanted this trip to be intimate, a quiet medical consultation with a world-renowned pediatric neurologist on Harley Street in London. No board members, no press, no Weaver Global fanfare. "Passports, please," Brenda asked, her eyes darting over Leo, who was currently humming a low, vibrating note and tapping his die-cast plane against his thigh. Tap, tap, tap. Vivienne handed over the navy blue booklets. Brenda scanned them, her brow furrowing slightly as Leo's humming grew a fraction louder. The child was trying to drown out the sudden screech of a jetway extending outside the massive glass windows. "Is he all right to fly?" Brenda asked, her tone hovering dangerously between polite concern and institutional liability. "He is autistic, and the airport is a bit loud for him. He will be perfectly fine once we are settled in his seat," Vivian replied, her voice smooth, polished, and leaving absolutely no room for debate. It was the same voice she used to dismantle hostile takeover bids in glass-walled boardrooms. Brenda hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing the passports back. "All right, enjoy your flight, miss. Weaver, you may proceed down the jet bridge." As they walked down the sloped, corrugated tunnel, the heavy scent of jet fuel and conditioned air rushed to meet them. Leo's humming subsided. He liked airplanes. He understood airplanes. Airplanes had rules, physics, and predictable mechanics. People were confusing, but thrust, drag, lift, and weight made perfect sense. At the door of the massive Boeing 777, a flight attendant greeted them with a practiced, radiant smile. "Welcome aboard. Turn left for first class, seats 2A and 2K. Vivian guided Leo into the opulent cabin. It was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, all brushed steel, dark wood veneers, and plush navy seating. There were only 8 suites in the cabin. The ambient lighting was a soft, icy blue, designed to mimic the evening sky. For a moment, Vivian let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Leo immediately climbed into seat 2A, arranged his noise-canceling headphones perfectly in the center of the tray table, and began counting the small, perforated holes in the leather armrest. Peace. They had made it to the sanctuary. Or so she thought. Across the aisle in 1D, an older gentleman in a bespoke tweed suit rustled his Financial Times loudly, glaring over the top of the pink pages at Leo. Leo, engrossed in his counting, had begun to rock slightly back and forth. It was a harmless, stimming behavior, a way for his nervous system to regulate the massive influx of adrenaline from traversing the airport. 21, 22, 23, Leo whispered, his body rocking gently against the seatbelt. "Excuse me," the man in tweed snapped, looking directly at Vivian. "Is he going to be doing that the entire 7 hours?" Vivian turned slowly. Her gaze, usually warm, hardened into obsidian. "He is settling in. If the sound of a child whispering is disturbing you, I suggest you utilize the complimentary earplugs provided in your amenity kit." The man sputtered, his face flushing a mottled red. "I paid $12,000 for this ticket. I expect tranquility, not a nursery. And I paid the exact same amount for his," Vivian replied evenly. "So unless you own the airline, I suggest you return to your newspaper." Before the man could formulate a retort, the heavy curtain separating the galley from the cockpit twitched. A man stepped through, bringing a sudden, chilled silence to the cabin. It was the captain. Captain Rawlins Webb was a man who wore his authority like a physical armor. Tall, with silver hair clipped with military precision, and a uniform so stiffly ironed it looked rigid, he exuded an aura of total, unquestionable command. He had been flying commercial heavies for 25 years, and he treated his aircraft like a sovereign nation where his word was absolute law. He also held a deeply ingrained, rarely voiced belief that first class was a sanctuary for the elite, a club that required a certain decorum, a decorum he fundamentally believed people who looked like Vivian and Leo did not possess. Webb's icy blue eyes swept over the cabin, taking in the flushed face of the tweed-suited man, and finally resting on Leo, who was still rocking, oblivious to the rising tension. now murmuring the safety card instructions he had memorized from a previous flight. "Is there a problem here?" Captain Webb asked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded immediate submission. "Captain," the man in tweed said, seizing the opportunity. "This child is completely uncontrolled. He's rocking, muttering, and frankly, making me incredibly uncomfortable. I have a major merger meeting in London tomorrow, and I cannot be subjected to this kind of disruption." Webb stepped closer to Suite 2A, looking down at Leo. Leo didn't look up. He hated eye contact. To Leo, eyes were overwhelming, piercing things. Instead, he picked up his die-cast Boeing and began running it along the edge of the tray table, his vocalizations ticking up slightly in pitch. V1, rotate, positive rate of climb. "Gear up," Leo whispered. Vivian immediately stood up, placing herself firmly between the captain and her son. She smoothed the front of her sweater, exuding a quiet power that momentarily gave Webb pause. But his arrogance quickly swallowed his hesitation. "Ma'am, I need you to control your child," Webb said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is a first-class cabin, not a playground." "My son is autistic, Captain," Vivian said, her voice steady, though her heart was beginning to hammer against her ribs. "He is not being disruptive. He is self-regulating. He isn't crying, he isn't out of his seat, and he isn't hurting anyone. Once we are airborne, he will most likely fall asleep. I am the sole judge of what constitutes a disruption on my aircraft," Webb retorted, leaning in slightly. His eyes narrowed, and Vivienne could see the precise moment his implicit biases hardened into a concrete decision. He saw a wealthy white passenger complaining, and he saw a black mother and a neurodivergent child who, in his narrow worldview, didn't belong in the front of his plane. "He is visibly agitated," Webb continued, gesturing sharply toward Leo, who, sensing the hostility in the man's posture, had begun to flap his hands, a classic autistic response to sudden stress. "He's a flight risk. If there is an emergency, I cannot trust that he will follow crew member instructions. Furthermore, I will not have my premium passengers alienated by this kind of unpredictable behavior." Vivian's blood ran cold. The phrase "your kind of people" hung invisibly in the air, unsaid but deafeningly loud. "A flight risk?" Vivian echoed, her voice dropping an octave, taking on a razor-sharp edge. "He is an 8-year-old boy. He knows the FAA safety regulations better than your flight attendants. You are violating the Air Carrier Access Act, Captain. You cannot deny boarding based on a disability." Webb's jaw tightened. He despised being quoted regulations, especially by passengers. The ASA allows a pilot in command to refuse transportation to any passenger who poses a safety risk or a significant disruption. Your boy is out of control. I don't know how you people usually handle things, but on my aircraft, we maintain order. You people, there it was, the mask slipping. Vivian did not raise her voice. She did not create the spectacle Webb so clearly expected her to make. She leaned in, her dark eyes locking onto his icy blue ones. "I strongly suggest you reconsider this course of action, Captain Webb. You are making an assumption based on prejudice, not policy. If you order us off this plane, you will regret it for the rest of your professional life." Webb scoffed, a short, ugly sound. He turned to the lead flight attendant, who was hovering nervously in the galley. "Call the gate. Have airport security escort them off. They are offloading." "Captain, please," the flight attendant whispered, clearly terrified but sympathetic. "He's just a little boy. We can close the suite doors." "Do your job or you'll be walking off with them," Webb snapped. He turned back to Vivian, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Take your son and leave, ma'am." before I have you removed in handcuffs for interfering with a flight crew." Leo had stopped humming. The aggression in the air had penetrated his safe bubble. He looked up at Vivian, his large brown eyes wide with confusion and rising panic. "Mommy, did I do it wrong? Did I do the pre-flight checklist wrong?" Vivian's heart shattered, but she refused to let Webb see her bleed. She reached down, gently taking Leo's hand. "No, my love, you did everything perfectly. The captain is just. He's making a mistake. We are going to take a different plane. A better one." "A different plane?" Leo asked, his lip quivering. Routine was everything to him. A change in the schedule was like a localized earthquake in his mind. "Yes, pack up your Boeing," she said softly. 2 airport security officers, looking uncomfortable and apologetic, appeared at the door of the aircraft. Vivian didn't wait for them to approach. She slung her leather tote over her shoulder, holding Leo's hand tightly. As she walked past the tweed-suited man, he had the audacity to look smug. When she passed Captain Webb, she paused. She looked at his name badge, permanently searing the gold lettering into her eidetic memory. Capt. R. Webb. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent a sudden, inexplicable chill down the pilot's spine. Webb puffed out his chest. "Goodbye, ma'am. Have a safe journey on another carrier." The walk back up the jet bridge was the longest walk of Vivian Weaver's life. It wasn't the physical distance. It was the sheer, suffocating weight of the injustice. Every step echoed with the humiliation of being cast out, of being deemed less than, of seeing her brilliant, beautiful son reduced to a nuisance by a man who possessed a fraction of Leo's intellect and none of his heart. When they emerged into the gate area, the waiting passengers stared. Some looked sympathetic, but most looked away, grateful they weren't the ones causing a scene. Brenda, the gate agent, looked absolutely mortified. "Mrs. Weaver, I am so sorry. The captain, he has final say. There's another flight to London at 11 p.m. on British Airways. I can try to endorse your tickets." "Don't bother, Brenda. It's not your fault," Vivian said calmly. She led Leo to a quiet corner of the terminal near a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the tarmac. She sat down on a cold metal bench and pulled Leo into her lap. He was trembling, tears silently tracking down his cheeks as he aggressively rubbed his die-cast plane against his palm. "I'm sorry, Mommy," Leo choked out. "I was too loud. I rocked too much." "Look at me, Leo," Vivian commanded gently, taking his face in both of her hands. She waited until his eyes finally met hers. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You are perfect exactly the way you are. That man was ignorant. He has a small mind, and small minds are afraid of beautiful, complex things. Do you understand?" Leo sniffled, nodding slowly. "Are we still going to London?" "Yes," Vivian promised, wiping a tear from his cheek. "We are going to London, and we are going to fly in a way that no one can ever tell you to leave." She watched as the massive Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate. She watched the ground crew detach the tug. She watched Captain Rawlins Webb taxi her son's airplane down the runway and lift off into the twilight sky. Then Vivian Weaver stopped being a mother comforting a child. She became the apex predator of the corporate world. She reached into her tote and pulled out her encrypted smartphone. She didn't call customer service. She didn't draft an angry tweet. Those were weapons for normal people. Vivian had access to nuclear launch codes. She dialed a private London number. It rang twice before it was answered. "Vivienne," a crisp British voice answered. It was David Harrington, her chief operating officer, and the man who managed the ruthless day-to-day operations of Weaver Global. "It's past midnight here. Please tell me you're over the Atlantic. I am sitting in Terminal 4 at JFK, Vivian said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was a tone David knew well. It was the tone that usually preceded a corporate bloodbath. What happened? David's tone instantly shifted to high alert. Captain Rawlins Webb of Trans-Global Airlines just ordered me and Leo off Flight 84. He decided my son's autism was a threat to his premium passengers. Silence hung on the line. David Harrington had known Leo since the boy was a toddler. He also knew exactly how deeply Vivian loved him and how violently she would protect him. I see, David said quietly. What do you need me to do? Call the airline CEO? We own the leases on 40% of their wide-body fleet. I can have their CEO groveling at your feet in an hour. No, Vivian said, her eyes tracking a baggage cart on the tarmac. That's too broad. I don't want to punish the airline right now. I want to punish him. Personally, surgically. Find out everything about Rawlins Webb. His schedule, his finances, his side contracts. Give me everything in 10 minutes. Consider it done. Vivian hung up. She sat with Leo, playing a silent game of I Spy with the vehicles outside until her phone buzzed. It was a secure email from David. She opened the file. Rawlins Webb was exactly what she expected. Overpaid, overleveraged, and deeply arrogant. But it was the second page of the dossier that made a slow, dangerous smile spread across Vivian's face. Commercial airline pilots often worked side gigs to supplement their income, particularly those with a taste for luxury cars and expensive divorces, both of which Webb had. Webb was a senior contract pilot for Apex Elite Aviation, an ultra-exclusive private charter company based out of Signature Flight Support at London Heathrow. According to his flight logs, Webb was flying the commercial 777 to London tonight. He had a mandatory rest period tomorrow, but on Thursday morning, he was scheduled to pilot a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar private charter from London to Dubai for a Saudi royal. The aircraft was a brand-new Bombardier Global 7500, the crown jewel of the Apex Elite fleet. Webb's bonus for this single flight was reputed to be in the 6 figures. Vivian tapped her earpiece and dialed David again. I read the file, Vivian said. Apex Elite, David replied. It's a boutique firm. They only have 6 jets. Webb is their golden boy for Middle Eastern clients. He's scheduled to fly their Global 7500 tail number Gilexi to Dubai on Thursday. Who owns Apex Elite? Vivian asked. It's a subsidiary of a private equity group out of Geneva. But here's the interesting part, Vivian. David's voice held a note of dark amusement. They don't own the planes. They dry lease them. Who holds the lease on the Global 7500? We do, David said. Weaver Aviation Leasing holds the paper on 4 of their 6 jets, including the 7500. Not only that, Weaver Logistics holds the exclusive contract for all ground handling, fueling, and hangar space at the Signature FBO at Heathrow. Vivian looked down at Leo. He had finally relaxed, his breathing steadying as he played a physics puzzle game on his iPad. Webb had thought he held all the power because he had 4 stripes on his shoulder and a locked cockpit door. He had no idea that the quiet black woman he had just humiliated literally owned the ground he was going to land on. David, Vivian said softly. Yes, Vivian? I want you to exercise the immediate recall clause on the lease for the Global 7500. Ground it, David paused. Vivienne, that will cost us a fortune in breach penalties with the charter client. Not to mention, Apex Elite will go ballistic. I don't care what it costs, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a terrifying register of absolute authority. Pay the penalties. refund the Saudi client double out of my personal accounts. I want that plane grounded. Furthermore, I want Weaver Logistics to immediately suspend all ground services for Apex Elite at Heathrow pending a safety audit. No fuel, no gate access. You are going to completely paralyze their entire operation just to trap Webb? David asked, awed. I am going to make sure that when Captain Rawlins Webb walks into that hangar on Thursday morning in his crisp little uniform, expecting to fly a $50 million jet, he finds out he doesn't have a plane, he doesn't have fuel, and he doesn't have a job, Vivian stated. Then arrange a private charter for me and Leo. Find me a Gulfstream G650. We are flying to London tonight. I want to be standing on the tarmac when Webb lands. It will be done, Vivian. I'll have a G650 ready at Teterboro Airport in 90 minutes. Thank you, David. Vivian hung up the phone. The terminal around her continued its chaotic swirl, oblivious to the fact that a multi-million-dollar corporate strike had just been launched from a cold metal bench in Terminal 4. She stood up and offered her hand to her son. Come on, Leo. We have a car waiting to take us to a different airport. We are going to fly on a private jet. No waiting, no crowds, and you can rock as much as you want. Leo's eyes widened, a brilliant spark of excitement cutting through the lingering sadness. A Gulfstream, twin Rolls-Royce BR725 engines, Mach 0.92. Exactly, Vivian smiled, her eyes flashing with a predatory gleam as she looked out into the night sky. And when we get to London, Mummy has to teach a pilot a very important lesson about gravity. High above the Atlantic Ocean, cruising effortlessly at 45,000 feet, the cabin of the Gulfstream G650 was a masterclass in silent luxury. Unlike the harsh, pressurized roar of commercial aircraft, the acoustic engineering of the private jet reduced engine noise to a barely perceptible hum. There were no strangers, no judgmental stares, and absolutely no rules dictating how a young boy should behave. For the first time in 24 hours, Leo had taken off his heavy Bose headphones. He was kneeling on a plush, cream-colored leather sofa, his face pressed near the oversized oval window. He traced the curvature of the earth against the starlit sky, softly singing a complex mathematical equation that he used to measure distance and speed. He was safe here. His nervous system, previously redlined by the hostile encounter at JFK, had finally reset. Sitting across from him at a polished mahogany table, Vivian watched her son with a mixture of profound relief and simmering, volcanic anger. She took a slow sip of her Earl Grey tea, her iPad glowing brightly in the dimly lit cabin. On the screen, a live video feed connected her directly to a boardroom in London, where David Harrington, her chief operating officer, was orchestrating the financial execution of Captain Rawlins Webb. I have Arthur Pendleton on line 2. David's voice crackled softly through Vivian's earpiece. Pendleton was the CEO of Apex Elite Aviation, the boutique private charter company that employed Webb for his lucrative side gigs. He is predictably in a state of sheer panic. He just woke up in Geneva to find his company completely paralyzed. Put him through, Vivian murmured, never taking her eyes off Leo. A click, and then a frantic, heavily accented British voice flooded the line. David, what in God's name is happening? I just got an alert from Heathrow. Your logistics division is refusing to refuel my fleet, and Weaver Leasing has locked the hangars on 4 of our jets. We have a Saudi Royal expecting to depart in the Global 7500 on Thursday morning. This is a breach of contract. Vivian pressed a button on the table, unmuting her microphone. It is not a breach, Arthur. It is an immediate recall clause, triggered by a comprehensive safety and compliance audit. I am initiating the audit. Personally, dead silence fell over the line. Pendleton knew exactly who he was speaking to. Vivian Weaver did not deal with subsidiary clients unless someone had made a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar mistake. "Miss Weaver," Pendleton stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. I don't understand. Apex Elite has a flawless safety record. We have paid our lease premiums on time every month. What could possibly warrant an unannounced grounding of my entire operation?" "A cultural rot within your personnel, Arthur," Vivian replied, her voice smooth and chillingly detached. "I lease you my $50 million aircraft under the strict condition that your operation maintains the highest standards of professionalism. Yet, I have discovered that you employ a senior pilot who lacks basic operational judgment, discriminates against neurodivergent children, and actively violates the Air Carrier Access Act. If that is the caliber of crew you hire, I can no longer trust my assets in your hands." Pendleton swallowed hard, the sound audible through the connection. "Which pilot? Tell me who it is, Miss Weaver, and I will fire them immediately." "You don't have to ground the company. His name is Rawlins Webb," Vivian stated, "and you will not fire him. Not yet, but—" "Listen to me very carefully, Arthur," Vivian interrupted, her tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "You will not alert Captain Webb to this situation. You will let him complete his commercial flight for Trans-Global Airlines. You will let him enjoy his layover in London. You will let him put on his Apex Elite uniform on Thursday morning and drive to the signature flight support terminal at Heathrow, expecting to collect his six-figure bonus for flying that Global 7500 to Dubai. And then what?" Pendleton asked weakly. "And then you and I will have a conversation with him," Vivian said. "You will refund your Saudi client out of your own pocket. Weaver Leasing will absorb the financial hit for the grounded jet. But Rawlins Webb is going to walk into that terminal and find out that his career is a smoldering crater. Do we have an understanding, Arthur? Or would you prefer I permanently terminate the leases and bankrupt Apex Elite by sunrise?" "I understand Ms. Weaver perfectly," Pendleton conceded, utterly defeated. "Excellent," Vivian ended the call. Meanwhile, somewhere over the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, Captain Rawlins Webb was settling into the crew rest compartment of the Boeing 777. He had handed control over to his first officer for the next 3 hours. As he pulled the scratchy airline blanket over his shoulders, he felt a deep sense of self-satisfaction. He had handled the situation at JFK flawlessly in his own mind. He had protected his first-class cabin from a disruptive element. The complaining businessman in 1D had even thanked him personally before takeoff, promising to write a glowing commendation to the airline's board of directors. Webb chuckled to himself in the dark. That arrogant black woman with her twitching kid had tried to threaten him. "You will regret it for the rest of your professional life." What a joke. People like her didn't hold real power. They were just loud. Webb closed his eyes, his thoughts drifting away from the commercial flight and toward his upcoming Apex Elite charter. Thursday was going to be beautiful. Flying a brand new Global 7500 to Dubai, catering to royalty, being treated like the elite aviator he knew he was. With the bonus check he was about to collect, he could finally pay off the mooring fees for his yacht in Miami. He drifted off to sleep, completely oblivious to the fact that the sky he was flying through belonged to a woman who was currently dismantling his life, brick by brick. Thursday morning in London dawned with a stubborn grey drizzle, the kind of pervasive English weather that soaked into the bones. But inside the chauffeured Mercedes S-Class gliding toward Heathrow's private aviation terminal, Captain Rawlins Webb was practically glowing with anticipation. He was dressed in his custom-tailored Apex Elite uniform. The fabric was vastly superior to his commercial airline polyester. 4 immaculate gold stripes adorned his epaulets. He checked his Rolex, a gift from a previous billionaire client, and smiled. 7:15 a.m. The Saudi royal's motorcade wasn't due until 9 a.m., giving Webb plenty of time to pre-flight the massive Bombardier jet, review the flight plan, and enjoy a complimentary espresso in the pilot's lounge. The Mercedes pulled up to the sleek glass entrance of Signature Flight Support. Webb tipped the driver a 20-pound note with a magnanimous flick of his wrist and grabbed his leather flight bag. He strode through the automatic sliding doors, carrying himself with the swagger of a man who owned the world. But the moment he stepped inside, his instincts, honed by decades in the cockpit, told him something was critically wrong. The terminal, usually a hive of discrete hyper-efficient activity, was dead. The massive digital departure board above the concierge desk was completely blank. The barista at the complimentary coffee bar was packing away the cups, and standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked tarmac was Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Apex Elite. Pendleton looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and he looked as though he hadn't slept in 3 days, which, given Vivienne Weaver's relentless corporate siege, he hadn't. "Arthur," Webb called out, drop his flight bag onto a polished marble table. "What's going on? Where are the ground handlers? My aircraft should be fueled and on the ramp by now. The client is arriving in less than 2 hours." Pendleton turned slowly. He didn't offer a greeting. He just stared at his star pilot with a mixture of exhaustion and profound resentment. "There is no flight, Rawlins. The client has been refunded and rebooked on a VistaJet." Webb froze, his mind struggling to process the words. "Cancelled? You cancelled a multi-million-dollar charter? Are you insane? Do you know how much money we just lost?" "I didn't cancel it," Pendleton said bitterly, rubbing his temples. "The aircraft was pulled. The hangar is padlocked. The fueling trucks have been strictly ordered not to service any Apex Elite tail numbers." Webb scoffed, stepping closer, his temper flaring. "By who? Who the hell has the authority to lock down an entire private terminal? Call the FBO manager right now. I'm not losing my bonus because of some bureaucratic mix-up." "It isn't a mix-up, Captain Webb." The voice came from the VIP lounge to Webb's left. It was a smooth, cultured, perfectly modulated voice, but it carried the weight of a falling guillotine. Webb turned sharply. Stepping out of the lounge was Vivienne Weaver. She looked exactly as she had at JFK, though today she wore a sharp, charcoal-gray tailored suit that screamed bespoke power. Behind her stood 2 men in dark suits, corporate security, and beside her, happily wearing his aviation headphones and playing with a different die-cast plane, was Leo. Webb's brain misfired. He blinked, staring at the black woman and the autistic boy he had unceremoniously kicked off his aircraft 3 days prior. For a split second, he assumed it was a bizarre coincidence. Perhaps she was incredibly wealthy and flying private herself today. "You," Webb said, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you doing here?" Vivienne walked slowly across the lobby, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. She stopped a few feet away from him, clasping her hands loosely in front of her. "I told you at JFK that you were making an assumption based on prejudice, not policy," Vivienne said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty terminal. "And I told you that you would regret it for the rest of your professional life." Webb let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. He looked at Pendleton. "Arthur, what is this?" Who is this woman, and why is she harassing me in a secure facility? Pendleton didn't look at Webb. He looked at the floor. Rawlins, this is Vivian Weaver, founder and CEO of Weaver Global Logistics. The name didn't immediately register with Webb. He was a pilot, not a Wall Street analyst. I don't care if she's the Queen of Sheba. Get her out of here so we can fix this plane situation. Captain Webb, Vivian interrupted, her voice dropping to that terrifying hushed register that made multinational boards tremble. Weaver Global Logistics owns the exclusive ground handling contracts for this entire airport. Furthermore, my subsidiary, Weaver Aviation Leasing, owns the Global 7500 you were supposed to fly today. In fact, I own 4 of the 6 jets in your company's fleet. The color rapidly drained from Webb's face. His arrogant posture crumbled as the horrifying reality began to dawn on him. The pieces clicked into place, locking together like a reinforced steel vault. You own the planes? Webb stammered, his voice suddenly sounding very small. I own the planes. I own the fuel trucks. I own the hangar you are currently standing in, Vivian clarified, her eyes locking onto his with predatory intensity. When you looked at me and my son in first class, you didn't see a passenger. You saw a nuisance. You saw a demographic you believed you had the authority to dismiss. You threw an 8-year-old autistic boy off a commercial flight to appease your own ego. Webb took a step back, his hands trembling slightly. Ma'am, Weaver, there was a misunderstanding. I was acting in the interest of flight safety. The ACA guidelines clearly state, "Do not dare quote the ASA to me," Vivian snapped, the sudden sharp volume making Webb flinch. I helped draft the Aviation Committee revisions for passenger disability rights in 2022. Your actions were illegal, discriminatory, and wildly arrogant. You thought you possessed ultimate power because you had a locked cockpit door. She gestured gracefully around the empty, silent terminal. This is what real power looks like, Captain. It is the ability to ground an entire airline without ever raising my voice. Webb looked desperately at his boss. Arthur, tell her my record. I'm your best pilot. You can't let her do this over a misunderstanding on a commercial flight. Pendleton finally looked up, his expression cold. He had lost millions of dollars and days of sleep because of this man's bigotry. You're fired, Rawlins. Effective immediately. Apex Elite is terminating your contract with cause, citing gross misconduct that threatened our corporate leases. Fired, Webb gasped, his chest heaving. You can't fire me. I have a union. I have a contract. Private charters don't have unions, Rawlins, Vivian reminded him softly. And your commercial airline. Transglobal? My company holds the leases on 40% of their wide-body fleet as well. Their CEO received a very detailed dossier this morning regarding your conduct, your blatant discrimination, and the ensuing PR nightmare I promised to unleash if you were not permanently grounded. Webb felt his knees go weak. He reached out to grab the edge of the marble desk to steady himself. In less than 5 minutes, his prestigious side hustle, his 6-figure bonus, and his 25-year commercial career had been completely incinerated. Why? Webb whispered, looking at the young boy who was now happily tapping his toy plane against the glass window, watching a baggage cart drive by. All of this, millions of dollars, over a delayed flight. No, Vivian said, her voice softening just a fraction as she looked at her son. All of this because you made my son feel like he didn't belong in the sky, and I needed to make sure you never touched the sky again. Reality crashed down on Captain Rawlins Webb with the brutal force of a sudden depressurization at 30,000 feet. He stood paralyzed in the center of the signature flight support terminal, the polished marble floor suddenly feeling like thin ice about to give way. The bespoke Apex Elite uniform he wore, once a symbol of his elite status and unchecked authority, now felt like a suffocating straitjacket. He watched, dumbfounded and hollowed out, as Vivienne Weaver turned her back on him. She didn't offer a dramatic parting glance or a gloating smile. To her, the execution was merely administrative. She gently took Leo's hand, murmuring something softly about going to find a proper English breakfast, and the two of them walked out the glass doors, flanked by their security detail. They climbed into a waiting, armor-plated Bentley Mulsanne and glided away into the dreary London rain, leaving Webb entirely alone in the ruins of his life. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his shock. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He had to fix this. He was a senior captain with 25 years of flight hours. He was unionized, he was respected, he was invincible. Or so he had believed until 10 minutes ago. He dialed Tom Reynolds, his senior union representative at Trans-Global Airlines. The phone rang 6 times before Tom finally picked up. The voice on the other end wasn't the usual jovial, fraternal greeting. It sounded like a man preparing to read a eulogy. "Tom," Webb breathed, pacing frantically near the deserted concierge desk. "Tom, you are not going to believe the morning I'm having. There is this woman, a passenger from Flight 84 on Monday." "Vivienne Weaver," Tom interrupted, his voice a flat, gravelly monotone. Webb stopped pacing. "Yes, how do you know her name?" "Because, Rawlins, I have been sitting in the CEO's office since 5 o'clock this morning." Tom sighed, the exhaustion palpable through the cellular connection. William Arrington dragged the entire union executive board out of bed. "Do you have any earthly idea what you have done? I made a command decision to secure my cabin." Webb snapped, his defensive arrogance flaring up like a reflex. The kid was acting erratic. The Air Carrier Access Act gives the pilot in command discretionary authority. "Shut up, Rawlins." "Just shut up," Tom barked, completely abandoning protocol. "This isn't about FAA regulations anymore. This is about $14 billion of corporate leverage. Weaver Aviation Leasing just served Trans-Global with a notice of default on 12 of our Boeing 777 wide-body jets. 12, Rawlins. They found a micro loophole in our maintenance reporting clause and triggered an immediate recall. Arrington is staring down the barrel of cancelling 40 international routes by tomorrow morning." Webb felt his stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. They can't do that over a single passenger dispute. "Vivienne Weaver can do whatever the hell she wants," Tom fired back. "She told Arrington she will drop the default notices on one condition. You, your wings, your badge, your pension. All of it, Arrington didn't even blink, Rawlins. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a fast-tracked termination hearing. The union cannot protect you. If we try, we bankrupt the airline. You are radioactive, Dick. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. Webb stared at his phone screen, the digital numbers blurring as a wave of pure, unfiltered terror washed over him. His mind raced through his financial obligations, the mortgage on his beachfront condo in Miami, the exorbitant mooring fees for his 60-foot Hatteras yacht, the alimony payments to his second and third wives. He was leveraged to the hilt, entirely dependent on his $300,000 commercial salary and his lucrative Apex Elite bonuses. Without them, he would be bankrupt in under 60 days. Desperation breeds audacity. Webb stormed out of the private terminal, ignoring Arthur Pendleton, who was shouting at him to hand over his security badge. He flagged down a black cab, his mind calculating a new flight path. If he was going down, he wasn't going down quietly. He would spin this. He would frame himself as the blue-collar victim of a vindictive, out-of-touch billionaire who was throwing a temper tantrum and abusing her corporate power. The media ate that kind of class warfare narrative up. "Take me to the city," Webb ordered the cab driver. "Bellamy and Partners, Crisis Management, Fleet Street." An hour later, Webb was sitting in a plush, leather-bound chair in the mahogany-paneled conference room of London's most ruthless public relations firm. He had maxed out his last remaining American Express card to secure a massive retainer fee. Across from him sat Julian Croft, a senior partner known for ruthlessly destroying the reputations of anyone who crossed his clients. "So," Croft said, steepling his fingers, his eyes gleaming with predatory interest as Webb finished his spun narrative. "Billionaire logistics mogul grounds international flights and destroys a decorated pilot's career because he asked her misbehaving child to quiet down. It's a compelling David and Goliath story, Captain Webb. We can leak this to the Times and the Daily Mail by noon. We'll frame her as unhinged. The public hates billionaires throwing their weight around." Webb let out a shaky breath, a sliver of hope finally piercing his despair. "Exactly. I want her dragged through the mud. I want my job back." Croft smiled, reaching for his desk phone. "Let me make a quick call to the media department to prep the press release." Webb sat back, finally allowing his heart rate to slow. He was going to survive this. He was Captain Rawlins Webb. He always landed safely. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The heavy oak door to the conference room finally clicked open, but it wasn't Julian Croft who walked back in. It was David Harrington, the Chief Operating Officer of Weaver Global Logistics. He was flanked by 2 formidable corporate attorneys. Webb sprang to his feet, his jaw dropping. "What the hell are you doing here? Where is Croft?" David Harrington calmly walked to the head of the conference table, unbuttoning his suit jacket and taking a seat. He gestured for Webb to sit down. Webb remained standing, his hands clenching into fists. "Mr. Croft is currently clearing out his desk," David said smoothly, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "You see, Captain, when Vivian Weaver decides to dismantle someone, she doesn't leave loose ends. She anticipated that a narcissist of your caliber would attempt to control the narrative through the press. So about 20 minutes ago, Weaver Global finalized a hostile acquisition of Bellamy and Partners' parent holding company." Webb felt the air rush out of his lungs. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of his leather chair. She bought the PR firm. "She bought the firm," David confirmed softly. "You are no longer a client. Your retainer has been refunded to your heavily overdrawn credit card. But that isn't the twist, Rawlins." David opened the manila folder and slid a tablet across the polished mahogany table. He tapped the screen. A high-definition video began to play. It was shot from the ceiling of the first-class cabin on Transglobal Flight 84. Weaver Aviation Leasing required all their aircraft to be fitted with proprietary, tamper-proof security cameras in the premium cabins, specifically to protect high-net-worth individuals from liability claims. The video clearly showed the entire altercation. It showed Leo sitting perfectly still, merely whispering to himself. It showed the businessman in 1D instigating the conflict. And brutally, with crystal-clear audio, it showed Captain Webb marching out of the cockpit. It captured his sneer. It captured his aggression. And it captured the damning, quiet phrase that had sealed his fate. I don't know how you people usually handle things, but on my aircraft we maintain order." "This," David said, his finger resting on the screen as Webb stared at his own bigoted face in horror, "is the unvarnished truth. The Federal Aviation Administration received a copy of this tape an hour ago, along with a formal complaint under the Air Carrier Access Act. The Civil Aviation Authority here in the UK has it as well. They are permanently revoking your commercial pilot's license on moral and safety grounds. You are never flying again, Rawlins. Not a Boeing, not a Gulfstream, not even a crop duster." Webb was crying now. The tears were a pathetic mixture of rage and profound self-pity. "Please," he begged, the bravado entirely stripped away. "I'll apologize. I'll make a public statement. Just don't release that video." "We don't need to release it," David said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "We have already forwarded it to your ex-wife's divorce attorneys. I believe they will find your sudden lack of income, coupled with this character evidence, very compelling during your upcoming asset renegotiations. Goodbye, Mr. Webb. Security will escort you out." Far away from the corporate carnage unfolding in the City of London, the atmosphere inside the pediatric neurology wing of the Harley Street Clinic was warm, bathed in natural sunlight, and profoundly quiet. Vivian sat on a plush velvet sofa, watching as Dr. Alistair Montgomery, a pioneer in neurodevelopmental research, interacted with Leo. Unlike Captain Webb, Dr. Montgomery didn't demand eye contact. He didn't flinch when Leo began to hum. Instead, he sat on the floor with the boy, surrounded by a massive collection of complex architectural blueprints and structural engineering models. "His spatial awareness is staggering, Vivian, Doctor," Montgomery murmured, watching as Leo flawlessly reconstructed a scale model of a jet engine turbine from memory, snapping the tiny plastic pieces together with rapid, rhythmic precision. The way his brain systematizes information. He isn't just memorizing facts. He is understanding the fundamental physics of the objects. The airport environment was overwhelming because his brain processes every single auditory input simultaneously. It's like having 50 radios playing different stations at once. He doesn't lack empathy or discipline. His sensory gating is just entirely different from ours. Vivian felt a warm tear slip down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of validation, not sorrow. He was so afraid that he had done something wrong on the plane. That pilot made him feel like he was broken. Dr. Montgomery looked up, his kind eyes hardening slightly. "Ignorance is the true disability, Vivian. Leo is not broken. He is highly specialized. If guided correctly, minds like his are the ones that end up designing the next generation of spacecraft, or solving atmospheric re-entry algorithms." Leo placed the final fan blade into the turbine model. He stood up, shaking his hands vigorously by his sides to release the built-up, joyful energy. He looked at Vivian, a bright, unburdened smile spreading across his face. "Mommy, I fixed the bypass ratio." "You did beautifully, my brilliant boy," Vivian said, pulling him into a fierce, protective embrace. It was in that quiet room on Harley Street that Vivian Weaver made a decision that would change the landscape of aviation far more than grounding a fleet of jets ever could. The revenge against Webb had been necessary to protect her son, but it was destructive. Now she needed to build. 14 months later, the sprawling Weaver Aviation Training Center opened its doors on a massive manicured campus just outside of Dallas, Texas. It was a state-of-the-art facility, but it was entirely unique. The lighting was customized to reduce glare. The acoustics were heavily insulated to eliminate echoing and background noise. There were sensory deprivation rooms, quiet gardens, and specialized instructors. It was the headquarters of the Weaver Horizon Initiative, a multi-million-dollar philanthropic foundation dedicated exclusively to training neurodivergent individuals in aerospace engineering, air traffic control, and flight simulation. Vivian had weaponized her wealth to destroy one bigot, but she was using her empire to open the sky for thousands of children who had been told they didn't belong. On the grand opening day, the press was gathered in the main atrium. Vivian stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd of investors, aviation executives, and dozens of neurodivergent teenagers and their incredibly grateful parents. For too long, the aviation industry has demanded uniformity. Vivian spoke, her voice ringing out clear and powerful. It has demanded that people fit into a rigid neurological box in order to be deemed capable. But the sky does not care about your eye contact. Gravity does not care if you need to rock to soothe your nervous system. The sky only respects physics, intellect, and passion. The Horizon Initiative is here to ensure that no child ever has to pack up their dreams and leave a runway just because someone else lacks the capacity to understand them. The applause was thunderous, but Vivian's eyes were locked on the back of the room. There, sitting inside a fully operational multi-million-dollar Boeing 777-300ER flight simulator, was 10-year-old Leo Weaver. He was wearing a custom-tailored captain's uniform. The simulator was safely bolted to the ground, but the digital screens wrapping around the cockpit showed a flawless, hyper-realistic view of a runway at twilight. Leo reached out, his hands moving with practiced, rhythmic perfection over the overhead panel. He flipped the APU switches, set the trim, and pulled back on the yoke. On the screen, the nose of the massive virtual aircraft lifted smoothly into the digital sky. Leo wasn't humming in fear anymore. He was humming the steady, powerful vibration of the engines. He was exactly where he belonged. Thousands of miles away in the sweltering, mosquito-choked humidity of a regional cargo airport in rural Florida, a 55-year-old man in a stained polo shirt dragged a heavy pallet of frozen fish across a loading dock. Roland's Webb wiped the sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag, his back aching, his bank accounts empty, and his wings permanently clipped. He paused to catch his breath, looking up at the sky as a gleaming white Weaver Logistics cargo plane roared overhead, its twin engines leaving a brilliant white contrail against the blue. Webb looked back down at the concrete. He picked up his clipboard, entirely forgotten by the world above, forever grounded by the mother and son he had tried to throw away. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel if this story resonated with you. We bring you powerful, dramatic tales of justice, resilience, and the unstoppable force of a parent's love every single week. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were in Vivian's shoes. Your engagement helps us share these important stories of overcoming bias with the world. Keep flying high, and we will see you in the next video.